Welcome to Taste of Truth Tuesdays, where we'll be serving up bite-sized conversations on all things fitness, nutrition, mindset, and spirituality. So grab your headphones and get ready to taste the truth with us every Tuesday. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform because every bite counts. Hey, welcome back to Taste of Truth Tuesday. Bonus episode. We are reflecting on the election cycle, and this is my message for the deconstruction community. So this wasn't planned, but after watching what just went down over the last couple weeks, I couldn't keep quiet. So in this special bonus episode, we're going to be diving into the divisiveness, the tribalism, and the moral narcissism that seems to be saturating our political and deconstruction spaces. So before we kick things off, I want to explain the deconstruction community, the deconstruction space, for any of you who may not know what that is. So in the only episode left from season 1, it's titled Faith Unbound, Navigating the Process of Disentanglement, but I changed the title to Deconversion because I ended up completely deconverting from Christianity. And I talked about the deconstruction space in that episode. I stumbled into this group of community around February, March, when I started questioning my own rigid, dogmatic, fundamentalist religious beliefs. And I am grateful for this space. It's supposed to be healing and provide growth for many, but it's not without controversy. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. I've shared my concerns after being in the deconstruction space for these last 6-7 months on several posts and Instagram reels, but I have yet to put all my thoughts together in a podcast episode, and that's what we're doing here. As someone who has moved away from fundamentalism into the deconstruction space, I know how easy it is to fall into the same patterns that we were trying to leave behind. This deep desire and the need for the right way, or this craving we have for certainty or to be on the right side, it's just as strong as ever. Yet, I really want to break down my frustrations and how this community has gone from questioning old dogmas to embracing brand new ones, and often without even realizing it. They claim to be open-minded, yet, judgment and exclusion seem to have replaced curiosity and critical thinking. Because remember, true change can only happen when we're willing to hear different perspectives without labeling those we disagree with as the enemy. A philosopher in 1859, John Stuart Mill, argued on liberty that free speech is essential for discovering the truth. He believed that truth emerges through the free exchange and debate of ideas, especially when opposing viewpoints are presented. He argued that even false ideas should be allowed to be expressed because the clash of differing perspectives helps refine and strengthen the truth. This highlights the complexity of truth, which can only be fully understood when it's tested through open discussion. So with that, let's kick off today's episode. So I want to set the stage by sharing something I found very interesting from journalist and political analyst Mark Halpern. He expressed some very serious concerns about what would happen if Trump were to win a second term. Now, he appeared on the Tucker Carlson podcast, cue the boo, hiss, from all the progressives, but come on, let's be open-minded and give it a listen.
I say this not flippantly. I think it will be the cause of the greatest mental health crisis in the history of the country. I think tens of millions of people will question their connection to the nation, their connection to other human beings, their connection to their vision of what their future for them and their children could be like. And I think that will require an enormous amount of access to mental health professionals. I think it'll lead to trauma in the workplace. I think there'll be some degree of... Are you being serious? 100% serious. 100% serious. I think there'll be alcoholism, there'll be broken marriages, there'll be... What? Yeah. They think he's the worst person possible to be president, and having won by the hand of Jim Comey and Fluke in 2016, and then performed in office for 4 years and denied who won the election last time, and January 6th, the fact that under a fair election, America chose by the rules pre-agreed to, Donald Trump again, I think it will cause the biggest mental health crisis in the history of America.
And wow, did he hit the mark? I mean, just take a listen to some of these audio clips gathered.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is there's a blue bracelet that we need to wear because I want to make sure that nobody ever thinks that I am one of the apparently majority of white women who voted for Donald Trump. I do not want you ever to think that I was one of them.
The pain in women's eyes today, like, there's not even any words that are needed. Like, I was just at the grocery store and, like, exchanged eye contact with a few women, and, like, you don't even have to say anything. Like, this shit is so heartbreaking.
So we're all talking about sex strikes and 4B. I love that for us. However, I need y'all to be aware of the fact that there are men out there who intend to act on their entitlement to your bodies, whether you consent or not. They're already talking about it online. So y'all need to fight. Like, y'all need to learn how to fight. Y'all need to square up and work through that freeze and fawn response. Get into some kind of self-defense. Start packing. You know what I'm saying? While we're on the topic, I would not be doing any mood or mind-altering substances around men. Don't put yourself in a position where you're not sharp around men, even men that you know.
You thought there was a male loneliness epidemic before? You thought birth rates were low before?
Be angry. No one gives a shit about your tears. Be angry. Hold people accountable. If you're able to leave your piece of shit right partner, do that. You wanted to get a divorce? Do it today.
I've seen so many negative things about this blue bracelet. Blue bracelet? Do you see, I took a bra strap and I just put a safety pin because I need to know who's safe to talk to. I'm not just doing this for y'all. I'm doing it for me. I need to know who's safe to talk to because right now I don't want to talk to anybody and I have to go out in the world. So we're going to see. We're going to see if it works, ladies. Okay, love y'all. Bye.
White women, we need to have a talk about the whole blue bracelet, safety pin necklace conversation that is happening. No matter what your intentions, wearing a blue bracelet is not going to indicate to Black women that you are safe to be around. And as white women, collectively and individually, I think it is important that we stop for a second and ask, is this a message for them or for each other or for ourselves?
Correct. I can no longer hold the place in my heart and my space to support women who actively voted against the right to their own body at a federal level and actively voted against the right to my own body at a federal level.
Stop dating men. Decentralize men from your life. It is very clear that they do not respect us, and it is not safe to date them.
Okay. You get the point. And shout out to Sasha Stone, Free Thinking Through the Fourth Turning, who collected all those clips for us. So I want to touch on a couple things there. You heard about this blue bracelet and the 4B movement. So I want to talk on that first. This feminist movement, which originated in South Korea, has gained significant traction in the U.S., particularly around the issues of gender roles and reproductive rights. So we have seen a 450% spike in Google searches and a whole new wave of social media posts that have been discussing what some people are calling the 4 no's and other terms that speak to rejecting traditional gender expectations. And I think it's fascinating. I don't disagree with all of those points. And honestly, some of it is a bit alarming. And we'll dive on that more later. I want to talk about next the misinformation and the impact on abortion laws. Because getting back to the deconstruction space, this is what I was seeing when I was navigating it. There is no federal abortion ban in place. I repeat, no federal abortion ban in place, and that the Trump administration has never once said that they were going to do that. So yes, Roe versus Wade decision was overturned, but all that did was give it to the states, and that gave them the power to regulate abortion. So I've seen conservatives sharing quotes from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is hailed from the progressive left as a feminist icon, that give the impression that she supported a more state-focused or gradual approach. But I wanted to touch that context is key. She basically was critiquing the broad federal approach. She thought that a gradual state-by-state shift might have reduced the backlash and built stronger public support, ideally grounding the decision in gender equality instead of using the broad sweeping approach of the right to privacy argument to establish a federal right. I think it's important to address that public opinion on abortion is nuanced, and polling often shows that majority of Americans support certain restrictions. Many Americans are uncomfortable with unrestricted abortion, especially later stages of pregnancy, and polls commonly reveal a preference for access in the early stages with limits as pregnancy progresses. For example, in a Gallup poll in 2023 found that while a majority believe abortion should be legal in some cases, they also support restrictions, especially in the second and third trimesters. So when we talk about the left, They like to point that Trump's judicial appointments have seriously influenced this dynamic, and that's what tipped the balance to overturn Roe. And so this move energized both sides. So the right sees this as a victory for states' rights, and the left views it as a potential threat to reproductive rights nationwide. So it's important to understand that public opinion does lean towards some restrictions, and campaign messaging often frames it in absolute terms, and this is just to galvanize voter turnout, but that didn't seem to work out, did it? Yes, some states have restrictions, sure, but no federal law is imposing a nationwide ban. And so without a massive shift in Congress and in the courts, it's unlikely that will happen. Honestly, I don't think it will. Trump himself has spoken out against that. His wife has spoken for protecting these in some way, shape, or form. We have other folks coming over from the Democratic Party under this unity party bracket. I just don't think that they're going to force Christian nationalism and abortion bans across the entire nation. Guess we'll see. The other thing is that there's this misinformation, this false idea going around that women won't be able to access life-saving procedures if they have a miscarriage. This is just false. In fact, most states with abortion restrictions will still allow medical treatments for miscarriages like a D&C, which are super essential for protection of the women's health and life. We get that. But what's actually being restricted are elective abortions, not necessary procedures. And this is where things are getting tricky. The spread of these exaggerated claims taps into the emotional centers of our brains. And I started noticing this when I was following all these pro-abortion, far-left, radicalist accounts when I was in the deconstruction space. If you remember, in previous episodes, we've talked about amygdala hijacking, the brain's response to fear and anxiety. We saw this all during COVID as well. So when we hear these alarmist claims, it triggers that brain to go into a fear-based reaction, shutting down our ability to think rationally. Instead of focusing on the facts, we're just reacting emotionally. Isn't it ironic the very people who cry out the loudest about misinformation are the ones spreading it like wildfire? I mean, how does that even happen? I mean, this isn't just harmless chatter. It is psychological warfare. It keeps people in a constant state of anxiety, preventing them from thinking rationally. The real issue, people are more likely to believe in fear-based narratives than actually check the facts because they're too busy being triggered emotionally. And this plays right into the fearmongers. It's so easy to control a population if you can make them afraid, right? Don't we see that's what's happening? Misguided campaigns around miscarriage care, the spread of exaggerated stories, and people feeling like their rights are directly being under attack. It's complete chaos. And it's all based on misinformation. Do you see where I'm going with this? Do you already hear the echoes of evangelicalism? This brings me to the concepts from Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion, because they apply here. He explains how our moral intuitions drive our beliefs in politics, often dividing us along different moral foundations. And so that's what I was seeing. I was like, where's this book been this entire year for me? Many deconstruction folks in this community now lean far left, where values like care and fairness are paramount. Meanwhile, conservative values like loyalty and authority are often viewed as suspect, and this fosters this us versus them mentality that can feel righteous for them but alienating for others. And ironically, in striving for freedom and empathy, the deconstruction space sometimes ends up falling into that same black and white thinking that it often critiques. And so in tandem, a book that I'm just finished and watched the documentary, it was a partnership with Greg Lukinoff and Jonathan Haidt. The book was called The Coddling of America's Mind. I highly recommend it, and I apologize if I mispronounce the authors' names. I highly, highly recommend reading the book, watching the documentary. It's on Amazon Prime. It offers useful framework for understanding the shifts, and so they identify 3 great untruths. Number 1, what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. Number 2, always trust your feelings. And number 3, life is a battle between good people and evil people. So these untruths, they argue in the book, create fragility, discourage critical thinking, and foster a tribal mentality. And these traits, they're increasingly characterized in the deconstruction space and many parts, I think, of the progressive left. And so that's what I find so ironic. I was like, these poor folks, they were in this evangelical fundamentalist Christianity their whole lives. That's not me. I was raised outside the church for 37 years. Then I was recruited into Christianity during the pandemic. So I feel that I have a little different life experience. Thank goodness I wasn't raised in the church. I'm not naive. I wasn't under a rock. I wasn't in purity culture. And so I feel like so many of these folks are really trying their best. They're like, I'm out of being a Baptist, I'm no longer a fundamentalist Christian, woohoo! But then they stumbled into this horrific zeitgeist that's already in the culture. They were unprepared, they had no idea, and I'm trying to flex compassion for these folks in the deconstruction space, but it's very difficult considering they're more bullies than the Christians that they like to critique. Anyways, let's dive deeper into these 3 untruths. So, the untruth of fragility. So, what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. That goes against so much ancient wisdom. We know what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. The concept of resilience and willingness to confront discomfort isn't completely foreign to those of us in the deconstruction space. I mean, it's not easy to realize that the religion that you were believing isn't ultimate truth. We've done that. I'm proud of you for that. But it seems like there's this emphasis on avoiding ideas that are seen as unsafe or harmful. And that typically is anything that deviates from progressive orthodoxy. And I mean, I genuinely felt this way. I think that might be somewhat of a trauma response. I was like, I hate the patriarchy. I must stand up against this. This is harmful. This is dangerous. And there is a lot of data proving that this isn't true, whether we want to look at the history of the ancient church or just, the research data that I've shared in previous episodes. But my point is that this fragility, it's reinforced by social media algorithms, and it cultivates an environment where disagreement feels threatening rather than enriching. And I just felt like that approach mirrors the fundamentalist rejection of dangerous secular ideas that we just left in evangelicalism. Dissent is demonized. So isn't that ironic that what began as a call for open-mindedness has then become this kind of brittle certitude, one that isolates rather than connects? Instead of learning resilience, aren't we just reteaching fragility, limiting our growth, and deepening the ideological isms? I said in my post before, are we actually deconstructing from harmful beliefs? Are we just switching from one team to the other? Because I'm trying to figure that out. I mean, not for me. I'm asking for a friend. Okay, number 2, the untruth of emotional reasonings. Always trust your feelings. Well, no. Feelings aren't facts. Fundamentalism often equates strong feelings with the truth. If I feel it, it must be right. No, it doesn't matter if you feel very convicted about your truth. Conviction doesn't equal fact. I've learned that the hard way myself when I was a fundamentalist, so I feel you. But so the deconstruction space, there's this similar emphasis on emotional reasoning. I even had someone tell me that when I look at politics, I vote for who triggers me less. That was exactly what she said. I am blown away. If something feels offensive or unsettling, it's treated as harmful. I had somebody that I interviewed last season for a podcast episode tell me directly that she does not listen to white men's voices. She said that she's not missing out on anything and that that's not dogmatic because she wasn't forcing that on other people. It was super intense for me. I chopped up a lot of the interview and still put it out because I still wanted to talk about some of the other things, but there was numerous experiences where I was faced with the coddled mind of the progressive left, and it was truly revolting. I've kept my mouth shut, but I really don't want to do that anymore. I am done self-censoring, and that's also what these untruths cultivate. You're not allowed to push against the status quo. I'm not okay with that. This approach of cancel culture, it's amplified by social media, where outrage and personal offense are always rewarded with visibility. And so, the authors of Coddling of America's Mind or Hate Its Work and The Righteous Mind, they remind us that the emotions shape our moral judgments, but that doesn't mean that it'll always lead to truth. Reacting purely on feeling closes off critical thinking. We talked about this in the amygdala hijacking episode. It'll create echo chambers where alternative perspectives are rarely considered. So instead of fostering deeper understanding, emotional reasoning will entrench us into our biases, and it'll fuel judgment rather than curiosity. And that goes against everything we want to do here on Taste of Truth Tuesday. So help me hold myself accountable to that, because it's difficult in today's political climate. And that leads me directly into the third untruth of us versus them. Life is a battle between good people and evil people. So this is the most divisive untruth, that the world can be easily split into good and evil camps. And this is evident in how some in the deconstruction community approach politics or social issues, painting conservatives or moderate as morally inferior. Gosh, we see a rigid us versus them mentality where anyone who questions progressive narratives is labeled deplorable, harmful, trash, racist, bigot, Nazi. I saw it. I saw it every day. When the first attempt on Trump's life happened, many of the folks that I was following at the time were like, thoughts and prayers, Trump. Thoughts and prayers, mocking what Christians say and do at school shootings because these progressives like hate guns, and it was vile. The hatred was vile. And it reminded me of how I felt in 2020 when the left was getting completely radicalized by these group identity politics. I mean, I left the DNC, the Democratic Party, in 2016, but then in 2020, I was just like, what the fuck? I want nothing to do with any of this. And that's why the coddling of American mind literally helped explain what the degradation of society has happened here with these three untruths. And so the research reveals that this moral division, it's natural. We all tend to view those who disagree with us as misguided or even morally flawed. But when we approach every difference as a moral battleground, this is how we close off true dialogue. And I thought that folks from the deconstruction space would understand that. I mean, we just came from, thinking that the rapture was going to happen, that if you didn't believe in the Jesus of the gospel and you say all these right words exactly, then you were going to burn in hell. What? I mean, I was in a high Calvinist church, one of the most cult-like fundamentalist beliefs you can get. And so you think that the deconstruction space could foster understanding across political divides since they were just a part of that. That's what I'm saying. Like, I was literally just a part of an abolitionist. I wanted to make abortion illegal. I went from being someone who was pro-choice in Portland, Oregon, who has had 3 abortions myself, and I haven't talked about the epic pain and regret that I have about this. You would think we would want to foster understanding here instead of embracing this us versus them mindset that mirrors evangelical exclusivity. Exactly. I used to align with a lot of progressive ideologies. I mean, I spent 12 years living in Portland, Oregon, surrounded by a culture that sometimes seems to push the boundaries of morality to the extreme, and I found myself questioning the true impact of some of these movements. Third wave feminism, for example, seems to lean heavily into the ideals of promiscuity and early sexualization, and that does not sit right with me. It's been extremely hard to reconcile the message of empowerment with the way women are encouraged to commodify their bodies or experience sexualization from a very young age. We see this in diet culture and the wellness industry. We see this with plastic surgeries, cosmetic surgeries. And so while there's a popular mantra that I also want to touch base on these progressive ideologies that I think is really harmful, sex work is real work. I can't ignore the complex and often exploitative dynamics that are within the industry. I mean, so many folks in the deconstruction space are very pro-porn, very pro-sex work. And I want to tell you, as someone who has been on the streets, who has done that work, hard fucking pass. From my own experience, I'll be forever tainted by the sex work industry. I think we should work to dismantle it, not empower it. It's not empowering. It's the absolute opposite. So these are not just isolated concepts either. There's this overarching dismissal of tradition and this glorification of anything goes, a straight hedonism in this progressive left. And, I'm not okay with it. I'm really not. I feel like it's eroding the foundations of community and accountability. Living in that environment left me with, a clear picture of the damage that some of these ideologies can do. It's left permanent scars. Like I mentioned, the 3 abortions that I've had. I cry, I mourn, I grieve. It was not a clump of cells. It was not a clump of cells. It was a living human being. I don't know where I fall on this pro-choice, pro-life. I mean, it sounds like we know where I fall, but I do understand it's complex. I do. But I cannot stress enough how intense it was for me watching those on the left screaming about women's rights and being so twisted and actually denying the science that, guess what? Life begins at conception. So those of you who scream, trust the science, you seem to want to deny it when it works best for you. Last thing I want to add here is so many folks who want to champion reproductive rights, you often gloss over the darker history of eugenics behind the early advocates of Planned Parenthood, like Margaret Sanger's disturbing past. You just want to ignore that part? Okay. Anyways, since the last election ended with a Trump landslide victory, rather than sparking any self-reflection, the moral absolutism, the moral narcissism, seems to have only intensified. The comment sections on many deconstructions accounts reveal the same tribal thinking that they claim to oppose. Instead of creating bridges, we see entrenched sides. Instead of open-mindedness, we see judgment. Look, I've been there. I was a proud Democrat in the past. I voted for Obama, but now as an independent, I'm calling it like I see it. Democrats need to take a good, hard look at themselves if they want a chance at victory. Blaming the electorate isn't the answer. You cannot keep denying biology and pretending men belong in women's sports, restrooms, or prisons. The idea that kids should undergo irreversible changes, it's misguided and it's absolutely out of touch. The open border agenda, it's hurting American workers, pushing down wages and driving up the cost of housing. Let's not even touch base on the human sex trafficking and the other humanitarian crisis. When will you start protecting your own people instead of pandering to these extreme policies? Discriminating against whites, Asians, and men in the name of countering past wrongs is not only setting us back, but it's racist in itself. Abandoning merit-based selection is wrecking our economy and opportunities for everyone. I mean, you cannot let people camp, defecate, and shoot up in public spaces and expect things to improve. The average voter is seeing all of this and they're rejecting it. If Democrats want to win again, they need to rethink their approach and get back to reality. Enough is enough. All right, I want to talk about the pipeline problem, how social media radicalizes. So the divide is worsened by social media. This is where the algorithms that favor outrage and tribalism and clickbait are pulling people into these extreme ideologies. Just as researchers talked about the crunchy hippie to alt-right pipeline that we talked about in a previous episode, I have seen a similar dynamic at play in these progressive spaces where these deconstruction folks are drawn into radical social justice ideologies like anti-racism, and they feel every bit as dogmatic as the evangelicalism that they just left. In this progressive pipeline, identity politics becomes a weapon and moral purity is enforced through this power victim binary that discourages any gray area, nuanced conversation, invites fear of being labeled as the oppressor. And this kind of ideological purity resembles the control and certainty that we all experienced in evangelicalism, only now it has a new political coat of paint. And this leads me directly into the concept of the horseshoe theory. And this suggests that the far left and the far right, though seemingly at opposite ends of the spectrum, often mirror each other's in attitudes and in tactics. This theory was initially presented by a French philosopher, Jean-Pierre Fay, proposed that the extremes of any ideology may end up behaving similarly, both tending towards authoritarianism and totalitarian thought, despite their stated differences. Although this theory definitely has its critics, the broader concept of this ideological mirroring holds up to our analysis of what's happening here in the deconstruction space. At first, it was all freedom, I thought, breaking away from oppressive systems, rejecting dogma, and embracing openness. But ironically, as people have deconstructed their faith, they can fall into the similar trap, from being free thinkers to members of the new ideological cult. Basically, when folks leave fundamentalism without fully untangling themselves from dogmatic thinking, they risk trading one rigid ideology for another. Without cultivating humility, empathy, we perpetrate the very same cycles of judgment and exclusion. So, in summary, moving forward, embracing true openness. I mean, I know I haven't sounded very open in even this podcast episode, but it's been difficult facing the us versus them rhetoric. But, I want to remind us that the author's insights say that real dialogue begins by understanding the values behind people's beliefs, even if we disagree with them. So progress and healing are going to require that we listen beyond labels, engaging in good faith rather than moral grandstanding. So if we are to avoid replicating the very structures that we're trying to deconstruct from, we need to make space for differing perspectives and approach them with curiosity. That means you cannot demonize conservatives. You cannot call everyone that voted for Trump a bigot, racist, misogynist. There's something wrong with that thinking. You have been sold these three untruths. It's a tired accusation that doesn't hold up when you look at the numbers. Trump's support among white voters did drop from 57% in 2020 to 49% in 2024, but the kicker is his support among Black and Latino voters actually went up from 38 to 42%. So against all odds, Trump is doing something that the Democratic Party has failed to do for decades. He's making the Republican Party more diverse than it's been in 60 years. So let's cut out the divisive name calling and start acknowledging the reality of his growing appeal across different communities. Real change happens when we go beyond just labeling others and instead build spaces where critical thought can flourish, even when it's uncomfortable. So this is my message to the deconstruction community and beyond. Let's keep questioning, but let's also make space for each other. Real transformation happens when we replace division with dialogue. All right, that's all I have for you today, folks. I am done for this season, I promise. But there will be another bonus episode dropping mid-December because I want to talk about mastering the basics for 2025. In season 1, we dropped the 365 Easy Challenge, which is a pushback from the popular fitness challenge you might have heard of, maybe not, 75 Hard. So we're doing 365 Easy because typically what most folks need is a simple plan mixed with consistency and patience, not a restrictive dietary protocol or a really intense exercise regimen. So we're going to be focusing on all sorts of positive habits in the 365 Easy. So I'll be dropping a podcast, like I said, mid-December in hopes that you can listen to that to get ready for the January New Year buzz. That is cliche, but I think it's also good to work with that energy. If you're motivated, you want to do a challenge, how about check out the 365 Easy? I'll have links in the show notes if you want to do your homework now early, but keep out for that podcast, which will drop sometime in December. Okay, anyways, until then, maintain your curiosity, embrace skepticism, and keep tuning in.